So what I meant to say in the Ram review video and forgot was that I thought it would have been a cool idea if Paul had on Abbey Road traded out Maxwell's Silver Hammer and Oh Darling for Ooh You off the McCartney album and Backseat of My Car off the Ram album. Had the Beatles doing those. I think they're both better songs than never was a huge fan of Maxwell or Oh Darling, even though Oh Darling's an okay song. But enough of that. So yeah, we're continuing on with the Paul McCartney reviews, and as I said in the Ram video, he just couldn't get a break at this particular point in time. McCartney came out, and both McCartney and Ram did well sales-wise and chart-wise. Got to #1 in America on McCartney and #2 on Ram, and I think it was the other way around in England too for McCartney in England and 1 for Ram. So sales-wise, he was doing okay, but critics weren't loving him, and a lot of the fans weren't too happy with his first 2 albums. Both of those have since gone through critical reevaluation to some point, and this album that's coming up next has 2, just to a lesser degree, even though it's been, in a lot of ways, a forgotten album that you don't hear too much about anymore. But it does have its fans, and it's, of course, the first Wings album, Wings Wildlife. And this came out on December 7th of 1971. Didn't do that well chart-wise, relatively speaking. It got to #10 in America, got to #11 in England. It was torn apart by critics even more so than McCartney and Ram had been. It's for example, go back to this Beatle book, Nicholas Schaffner, where he calls it listless, excruciating, half-ass. Paul's customary musical craftsmanship is totally missing. So, yeah, and this is an album that McCartney's pretty much doesn't mention anymore and seems to have forgotten. He did do a tour with Wings in 1972, mainly in England and Scotland maybe, just playing at universities, small places, which was an idea he had toward the end of the Beatles. He had suggested to John and George that they just show up in pubs and play, which George and John both thought was a ridiculous idea and sort of just laughed him out of the room. So he finally got to do that on his own solo. He did play some songs from this and Ram and the McCartney album on that tour. I don't think he's, with the exception of maybe I'm Amazed, I don't think he's ever played anything from any of those albums in subsequent tours. He might have played a few songs from Ram in some of his later 90s and 2000s tours, maybe, but I don't think he's ever played anything from this again. So, yeah, this album was my introduction to Beatles solo albums. I had this came out, like I said, in '71. I got into the Beatles big time in '73 when I was about 9 or 10 years old, and I knew at that point that they were already broken up. But I didn't have any solo albums. I had heard, of course, some of the songs on the radio. Uncle Albert, probably Imagine, My Sweet Lord, a few things like that. I would later get some of the 45s around 1974, so I remember getting a handful of, I think, Live and Let Die. I've already said this, Live and Let Die, a couple of the Ringo singles, and Mind Games by John Lennon. But I don't think I even had those at this point. And, you know, being a kid, I got into the Beatles through my older brother's albums. They were out of the house and into school and stuff at that time, but they had left some of their stuff at home, some of their albums, and so I devoured those once I really started paying attention to the Beatles and got my parents to buy some Beatle albums. I remember first ones I got otherwise were Let It Be and Introducing the Beatles and some of those, but it didn't really occur to me to get into their solo work just yet because there were plenty of Beatle albums to still get that I didn't have at that point, and being a kid I didn't have a lot of money. So, but around that year, '73 or so, uh, there was a around 73, 74, my mom came home one day, gave me this on an 8-track tape, not on an album. And I was thinking, I was pretty excited, thinking, hey, a Paul McCartney album. It was already big time into the Beatles by that time for close to a year or so. And so I didn't look at the song listing and didn't recognize any of these songs. And so I ran back to my room and, turned on the stereo and stuck the 8-track tape in and listened, expecting, I guess I was expecting Beatle type record music just without John and George. And I listened to it. I hated this album. And so this kind of put me off of getting into solo Beatle records for a while. I just thought it was crap. And I remember thinking, maybe because it was an 8-track tape, so this picture was a lot smaller than the album cover. And with the album cover, you can't really tell that's who that is, who these people are. I think this had a hype sticker on it in the store. But I mean, the 8-track was even smaller. But I remember thinking, maybe there's some other guy named Paul McCartney that also makes music. But I mean, it became, apparent to me pretty quick that this was the same Paul McCartney. But it's like bit bop, bit on boom. This just doesn't sound like the Beatles. What the hell is this stuff? And so yeah, I didn't really buy any more solo Beatle records until, like I said in those earlier two videos, around '77, I made a little money mowing yards in the summertime and bought 5 or 6 of the solo albums at once there. But that was, that was 3 or 4 years later. And, and in between that, of course, I did hear on the radio things like Crackerbox Palace and listen to what the man said and Band on the Run and Jet. And I did get a handful of 45s. And they got Band on the Run in addition to those other ones that I mentioned earlier. But I kept this on the 8-track tape, and I would listen to it from time to time, and keep in mind that at this time I'm 9, 10, 11 years old. I guess just trying to, I don't know why, thinking that maybe eventually it'll sink in or I'm missing something and I'll get it and I'll start to like it. I never really did. And I don't know whatever happened to that 8-track. It's long gone. Probably got thrown away or sold it to half-price books or something way back when, or just lost it. But then when I did start buying Beatles solo albums, and another reason I didn't buy them is there's still a lot of Beatle albums I didn't have, and I had to wait for birthdays or Christmas or save up what little allowance money I got here and there to get Beatle albums. It's not like I could run out and buy them all at once. And the other thing was because of this, I was thinking, if Beatles solo albums sound like this, I don't, not that in big a hurry to get to hear them. So, but once I did buy those in '77, that group of them, by that point I had most all of the Beatle albums, and so I did start collecting the solo albums up through about 1980, 82, and at that point I quit for a long time, but we'll get to that down the road. But this one really put me off solo albums for quite a while there. And yeah, so like I said, this album does have its fans, even though it got pretty much torn apart by the critics and the public when it came out. But some people have reassessed it, not to the degree that, say, Ram has been reassessed, or even the McCartney album, because this is largely an album that's pretty much forgotten, other than just hardcore Beatle fans. I did hear it a few times through the years, even though I didn't have it anymore. Not for years, but I mean, I have listened to it online on YouTube and stuff, just through the years, to sort of see if my opinion had changed much one way or the other. So let's see if it has. Oh, and here's the back. Kind of weird. It looks like one of John Lennon's drawings in his own right, and all those type books. But I guess Paul did that. And the liner notes by this guy, this Clint Harrigan, is actually Paul McCartney writing under a pseudonym. Really pretentious and dumb liner notes, Macs returned to Britain during the time following, wrote a bunch of songs at their country retreat. So, anyway, um, yeah. All right. So, side one starts with, and this is one thing that's interesting about this album is this is sort of a change of pace for. It's not like any other McCartney album. I'll give it that. It's there's not a whole lot of commercial hit songs on here. Really, there's only one, and there's a lot of just improvisation and just Paul and them playing and banging away and Paul screaming and carrying on. And a lot of the songs are really long, 5-6 minutes length. Apparently, this was inspired by Bob Dylan having gone in and knocked out an album in 3 days or 4 days. Paul thought it'd be a cool deal to do the same, but we'll see if that worked out for him. Oh, and before we get into the songs, Wings was his band. I've always, and technically Wings is a band and says so on the record label, so yes, it's a Wings album, not a Paul McCartney album. Personally, I've always just thought that the Beatles were a band, John, Paul, George, and Ringo. They broke up and then they made solo records, and so I've always just considered these things Paul McCartney records, whether it's Ram or McCartney or Tug of War or Venus and Mars or Band on the Run. I never really considered them Wings records, and not to put any of the, accomplished musicians who played with them in Wings over the years, but it just never felt like a band to me. It just felt like him getting session players to play on his albums and tours. Certainly, nobody who ever went to see Paul McCartney in concert was showing up to see Danny Lane or Hugh McCracken or Lawrence Juber. They were there to see Paul McCartney, whereas the Beatles, you were there to see all of them, if that makes any sense. This is what sort of hurt their solo careers, all four of them, I think. The fact that when you had the Beatles, and it could be any band, the original band, the original Rolling Stones, the Talking Heads, the Cars, the Go-Go's, Josie and the Pussycats, whatever, and you got people who were wanting to form a band and get a record deal and play shows, and they're nobodies that nobody knows or cares about, and then they get a record deal and they have a hit, and all of a sudden they're another hit and they're huge and world famous. But they knew each other when nobody cared who they were, so they're not going to have any trouble saying the Beatles. If John or Paul gets too big of a head or comes in with a song that's crap, George or Ringo or John or Paul or whoever's not going to have any trouble saying that's crap. Whereas now the Beatles are gone and all four of them are out on their own. So you got Paul McCartney with these musicians, good musicians, but not anyone famous per se or anyone who knows. So they're not going to, Paul McCartney comes in with a crap song, they're not going to, may not think, hey, that's a crap song, but they're not going to say that, because if they do, there'll be another guitar player there the next day and they'll be escorted off the grounds. Or they're going to think, hey, this is Paul McCartney, he was in the Beatles, he wrote Strawberry Fields, Paperback Writer, Eleanor Rigby, who am I to question him? So you lose that check that you had with, he loses that check he had with like John and George around. And it's the same with any band, not just the Beatles. And that's where their solo careers suffered at times, I think, because they didn't have anyone there to tell them no, or, that's a good song, but it's not there yet, go back and work on it some more, and that sort of thing. But, yeah, anyway, on to the songs. First song is Mumbo, and it is a guitar, drum, screaming freak out. I think they just did it on the spot. Just a big old mess, screaming noise. I actually like it a lot. I'm going to give that a 9. I think it's fun. Something different from McCartney. It's not tuneful or melodic or commercial or catchy song at all. It's just him banging away and screaming, and whoever the guy is playing the guitar on this playing the guitar. Is that Danny Sewell? I think he's the drummer, but anyway. So yeah, big noise, a lot of fun, change of pace from McCartney. And that's the good part of the album, unfortunately. Second song, and this is one I remember from having this when I was a kid, couldn't stand it. Bip Bop, uh, Bip Bop, Di Bam Boom, Bip Bop, Ba Bam Boom, and repeat that for about 30 minutes. I think the song's like 4 or 5 minutes, but it feels like it's 2 hours. Meandering, pointless, just stupid song. I didn't like it then when I was 9. I don't like it now anymore. Gets a 0. Bip Bop my ass. Love is Strange. It's number 3 song. Paul sings, "Oh yeah, yeah." I sing, "Oh no, no." "Oh hell no." Wretched Crap gets a 0. This is an old song, cover song by, who did this? Sylvie and Sylvia, or can't remember. Sylvia and somebody did it. Robbie and Sylvia. Seems like I knew, even back then, that this was a cover song of an older song. Uh, I always thought the song was from the early 60s, the original Love is Strange, but I looked it up. It's from 1956. I didn't know it was that old. And I've heard the original. The original's better than the cover here. But I was never a huge fan of the original even. It's okay, but it's not. I wouldn't give the original a 0. I'd give it like a 5 or something on a 1 to 10 scale. It was just never one of my favorite songs, but this cover is just horrible. And like I said, it gets a 0. Someone on one of my Beach Boys album reviews, I gave a couple of songs a 0, and somebody in the comment section said, told me I couldn't give them 0s. Well, just did it again, so watch me. Wildlife, the title song, wraps up side 1. It goes on for about 6 minutes. I don't know what he's singing about. He sings about political nonsense, and he sings about the animals in the zoo. Sometimes he says the aminals in the zoo. Save the wildlife type lyrics, I guess. I don't know. Political nonsense might be directed towards John Lennon and all the carrying on he was doing with Seahag, or sorry, Yoko, his beloved wife at the time, with sometime in New York City and so forth. Rubbish song, but it's the kind of rubbish I like, and I really enjoy it. And he just carries on, just screaming and drawing out words, and a lot of vocal gymnastics on here. It's kind of like a James Brown groove in a way, and not really, but sort of. It just goes on forever, but I could listen to it forever. I really like this song. It's fun to see him in that kind of mood and just sort of raw, screaming and carrying on about who knows what. But I give it an 8.5. I like it. So there is some redeeming quality to this album. Side 2 opens with Some People Never Know. It's a laid-back song. It goes on for like 6 minutes. It's way too long, hardly memorable. Pretty song, very boring song. Give it a 3. Yeah. Next song is I Am Your Singer. It has some crappy backing vocals from Linda. Boring song. Give it a 1. There's not really listed on the song listing, but there's the Bip Bop link, which is, I don't know, 30-40 second little bridge thing. So it's not as excruciating and drawn out as Bip Bop. So I won't give it a 0. I'll give it a 1 because it's here and there before you know it, and it's harmless enough. And what do we got left? Okay, now we come to Tomorrow. He had Yesterday, so now he's got Tomorrow. This is the only commercial sounding song on the album, the only potential hit sounding song or regular parameters type pop song or rock song. Pretty song, I like it. It wants to be Yesterday or Eleanor Rigby, but it falls short of that. Pretty, by some measure, it falls short of that. But it shows promise, and it's a good catchy song, good lyrics, nice melody. It was not released as a single, and he did not do this on his 72 tour, which is kind of surprising, and I don't know that he's ever done it since. be a good thing for him to drag this out in concert. It's a nice song. I give it a 7.5. The album ends with Dear Friend, which of course with Ram and Imagine, John and Paul were sniping back and forth against each other and accusing each other of this and that and backbiting over the Beatles breakup. And Dear Friend is sort of a conciliatory note to John to, hey, let's bury the axe and start to sort of make up type thing, which is nice and everything. And it has a some nice piano in the song. Way too long, a pretty dull song. If you can not fall asleep, it is. There's a little bit of a nice guitar coda at the end of the album that comes in. That's just tacked onto the song, into the song. But it's just sort of long-winded, boring, and meandering, a lot like my videos. But anyway, Dear Friend, I'll give it a 1.5. This album and the overall would have made a nice little EP with Tomorrow and Mumbo and Wildlife. And most people don't like Mumbo or Wildlife very much. I understand that, but I dig them. I think they're just a screaming bunch of racket, nice little groove and fun banging around. And Tomorrow's a cool little pop song. No major thing by any means, but a nice little pop song. But taking everything together, I give this album 2.75. So we'll see if things improve. And I really do love McCartney solo stuff. So I know that I've been pretty hard on the first album and this album. And I do like the first album a lot better than this. It has its moments, and I love Ram and some of the stuff to come ahead I really like. This one, I might drag it out occasionally to listen to those 3 songs. I don't really see myself listening to the other stuff on here much, if at all, in the future. Yeah, it's probably best forgotten, truth be told. See ya with, what's it, Red Rose coming up.